Before he went to prison, Rayful Edmond III, the biggest drug dealer in the history of Washington, D.C., sold some $300 million a year worth of. After he went to prison, he sold even more.
He was doing more from in prison? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, at its maximum, he was doing about 400 kilograms of per month while in prison, and while on the street, he was doing about 300.
Rayful Edmond, despite his incarceration, was continuing to deal using inmate telephones, visitation privileges, and mail privileges.
Tell me what drugs you dealt with in prison. Crack?
Crack.
Heroin?
Heroin.
What else?
Marijuana.
There's nothing left. I mean, you did the gamut.
Yeah, I did it all.
Rayful Edmond have the biggest cooperation I've ever seen in history.
What do you mean?
He told on over 300 people.
Why did you decide to cooperate?
Because I wanted to put it all behind me. I wanted to help my family, first of all. That was the first thing that gave me the motivation. My mom, my aunt, and my 3 sisters.
If you ask anyone from Washington, D.C. about Rayful Edmond, chances are they've got a story to tell. Rayful wasn't just a name in the game, he was the game. Back in the 80s, this guy turned D.C. into what people called the MDR capital of the U.S. because of the crack epidemic. By the time he was 24, Rayful was running a drug empire that had over 150 people working for him and was pulling in a mind-blowing $300 million a year.
When crack was the hustle here in the nation's capital back in the 1980s, nobody, absolutely nobody, worked harder than Rayful Edmond III.
Rayful Edmond III, the biggest drug dealer in the history of Washington, D.C., sold some $300 million a year worth of and crack.
But Rayful wasn't the type to slow down. Even after he got arrested, he managed to keep his hustle going strong from behind bars.
Tell me what drugs you dealt with in prison. Crack?
Crack.
Heroin?
Heroin.
What else?
Marijuana.
In fact, word is, he made even more money locked up than he did on the streets. That's how deep his connections ran.
He was doing more from in prison? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, at its maximum, he was doing about 400 kilograms of per month while in prison, and while on the street, he was doing about 300.
But here's the twist in his story. Rayful went from being one of the biggest and most respected figures in the game to being known as one of the biggest snitches ever. Reports claim he cooperated with authorities and gave up information that got over 100 people arrested. Some even say he snitched on as many as 300 people. This completely wrecked his reputation, and in the streets, being labeled a rat is the ultimate downfall.
Rayful Edmond have the biggest cooperation I've ever seen in history.
What do you mean?
He told on over 300 people.
Rayful was somebody that he, really, looked at as, as a family member, you know what I'm saying? And it really affected him what he did.
Sadly, Rayful's story ended on a mysterious note. After finally being released from prison, he passed away suddenly from a reported heart attack just a few months later.
One of DC's most infamous drug kingpins, Rayful Edmond, is dead just months after being released from federal prison.
There's a lot to unpack in his story, so let's dig a little deeper. Rayful Edmond III was born on November 26, 1964 to Constance Bootsy Perry and Rayful Edmond II. Growing up in Washington, D.C., Rayful was the youngest of 6 siblings, and he wasn't shy about his role in the family. "I was the little baby brother. I was the king," he once said, hinting at the confidence and charisma that would later define him. Life in the Edmond household was anything but quiet. At any given time, their home on M Street Northeast was packed with 20 to 30 people. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and siblings, all crammed together, doing whatever they could to survive. Despite the chaos, Rayful's family was tight-knit. They looked out for each other, and as long as everyone was taken care of, nobody asked too many questions. His mother, Constance, made it clear, "As long as he took care of me, I didn't care what he did." This unspoken understanding created an environment where legal and illegal incomes blended seamlessly into their daily lives. Both of Rayful's parents had government jobs. His mother worked for the Department of Health and Human Services, but they also hustled on the side. There were whispers that Rayful's father, Rayful Edmond II, had been a major heroin distributor in DC and Baltimore during the 1970s, though little is confirmed. Rayful got his first taste of the drug game by watching his parents. They didn't hide their hustle. In fact, they brought him into it early. By age 9, Rayful was already helping out. According to one of his childhood friends, Royal Brooks Jr., he was raised bagging stuff. He started as a runner, carrying cash for his mom and picking up money for his dad. Before long, he was selling pills himself, hitting the open market on street corners. Eventually, Rayful's father gave him his first kilogram of coke, and from there, his operation exploded. It just got too big, Constance admitted. He just went up and went out on his own. As Rayful's drug empire grew, so did his responsibilities to his family. He used his newfound wealth to take them out to dinner, pay bills, and give them a better life. Before long, he was funding the family entirely. Despite the circumstances, Rayful excelled in other areas of life too. He was a standout student, impressing teachers with his intelligence and work ethic. Miss Wise, his elementary school teacher, once said, "He was good at reading, math, thinking, logic. He was born with the gift to be smart."
Rayful was one of those children that was born with the gift to be smart. And because of it, yeah, he had the edge on everybody else.
At Dunbar High School, Rayful was more than just a good student. He was popular, stylish, and athletic, winning awards like Most Popular and Best Dressed. Teachers like Mr. Gray saw his potential, describing him as well-listened and someone who understood what it took to be successful. On the basketball court, Rayful was a star, adding another layer to his already impressive persona. After high school, Rayful made a surprising move. He enrolled at the University of the District of Columbia. For someone with his background, this wasn't a typical path, but it showed his ambition and willingness to explore different options. However, college life didn't hold his attention for long. After a few months, he dropped out to focus on the drug business, lured by the promise of massive profits. From the very beginning, it was clear that Rayful's #1 priority was his family. Whether it was taking care of bills, putting food on the table, or providing a sense of security, he always made sure they were taken care of. Even as his world expanded and the stakes got higher, that sense of loyalty and responsibility never wavered. By 1986, at just 22 years old, Rayful Edmond was one of the biggest drug dealers in Washington, D.C., controlling roughly 20–30% of the coke market in the city. He had already made a name for himself and wasn't stopping anytime soon. Spotting the shift from powder coke to crack, Rayful made key connections with established kingpins like Cornell Jones and Tony Lewis, ensuring his operation stayed ahead of the game. Rayful's business was based in Northeast D.C., particularly around the strip between Morton and Orleans Place and 4th Street near M Street. These were prime spots, complete with escape routes for his crew to use if the police got too close. His grandmother's house on M Street became the heart of his empire. This was where the real work went down, as coke was processed into crack and packaged for the streets. As his operation grew, so did his need for manpower. Rayful hired around 150 workers, including enforcers armed to the teeth and sellers who kept the product moving. He also brought in local kids as lookouts, paying them small amounts to keep an eye out for trouble. Even his family was deeply involved in his business. With demand soaring, so did the number of addicts, which meant more customers and more money. On busy nights, his team was handling up to 30 transactions per minute. Sellers were raking in about $5,000 a week each, and the entire operation brought in around $750,000 weekly. At the height of his success, Rayful was reportedly making $2 million in a single week. His network moved approximately 1,700 kilos of Colombian coke every month, TF-ing it regularly from Los Angeles. He didn't just hoard his wealth, though. He helped others build their own operations, like Alta Ray Zanville, one of his closest female associates, who started her own drug business thanks to his support. Rayful embodied the rags to riches story, exploiting the economic desperation of his neighborhood to rise to the top. But his success came with a heavy cost. Under his command, his crew was responsible for as many as 30 MDers, with violence erupting regularly to protect territory and maintain power.
Police say the Edmond organization enforced its will with violence. As many as 30.
Reflecting on his life later, Rayful told journalist Juan Williams, "Things like that can happen. I'm not saying drugs are good, and I'm not saying they're bad, but it's a way of life, and it's something we have to deal with." Despite the violence, Rayful approached his business like a seasoned entrepreneur. Assistant U.S. Attorney John P. Dominguez noted, "He could remember deals and transactions to the penny. Just think of what he could have done legitimately."
He could remember deals, transactions to, the penny, and
kilos.
Rayful had a sharp mind for marketing and knew how to wield his power to keep the cash flowing. At the same time, he indulged in both modest and extravagant habits. While he flew discount airlines and rented a plain-looking house, he also spent lavishly when it suited him. In 1988, during just 1 month, Rayful made 2 trips to Los Angeles, racking up over $5,000 in hotel bills, all paid in cash. He owned a custom diamond-encrusted Rolex worth $100,000 and drove luxury cars like a Mercedes-Benz, Porsche, and Jaguar. His home was said to be filled with trash bags stuffed with cash. He even had a habit of throwing money out of his car windows and spoiling his female admirers with expensive gifts like gold hoop earrings.
Ray basically count the money out. Broad come out back and just throw 2 tennis shoes, little drawstring bags in the back. He'll give him like $200,000.
Despite his wealth, Rayful stayed rooted in his neighborhood. It was familiar, safe, and central to his business. To the local kids, Rayful was a hero. He gave them jobs as lookouts, but more importantly, he gave them hope. Kids respected him and saw him as a big brother figure. If they ever had any problems, they could come and talk to him, said the director of a local rec center. Rayful was often seen playing basketball with the kids or chatting with them at community courts. He also gave back to the community in ways that made people see him as a blessing, despite his illegal activities. If someone needed help with bus fare or bills, Rayful was there to lend a hand. When a neighbor's brother died, he donated $200 worth of flowers to the grieving family. His generosity made him a beloved figure in the neighborhood. Rayful Edmond's life of luxury and power came to a screeching halt on April 15, 1989, when he was arrested at his girlfriend's house in Washington, D.C. His empire had started to unravel after 4 men were busted in Los Angeles trying to buy $1 million worth of coke from an undercover agent. Once the men were in custody, they started talking, implicating Rayful in a sprawling network of drug distribution and shedding light on the full scope of his power and influence. The Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, later revealed that Rayful's arrest was the result of a 2-year joint investigation involving the FBI and DC police. Details of his arrest and the events that followed remain unclear. But it's known that he was moved from the DC jail to a secure location as legal proceedings began. What followed was a high-stakes 56-day trial that became one of the most talked-about cases in DC history. Rayful faced numerous charges, including operating a continuing criminal enterprise, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, racketeering, and other offenses. He wasn't alone in the dock. Alongside him were 27 other defendants, including several family members, his mother, sister, father, and other close relatives, as well as key allies like Columbus, Little Nut Daniels, Brooks Jr., and Antonio Lewis, one of his top enforcers. The trial quickly turned into a spectacle, with over 100 witnesses testifying. The danger surrounding the case was palpable. The jury, the first anonymous one in DC's history, had to be protected behind bulletproof glass due to threats of violence.
Jurors are under 24-hour guard. Their names are kept secret. The whole trial is conducted behind bulletproof glass.
Tragically, the dangers weren't just hypothetical. A 17-year-old witness, Donald P. Wimley, who worked as a part-time errand runner for Rayful, was gunned down in a drive-by shooting just days before he was supposed to testify. Another witness's home was firebombed during the trial, further highlighting the risks of speaking out against Rayful's operation.
In fact, the house of the family of one witness was firebombed after her testimony. Another key witness has refused to testify.
For his own safety, Rayful was held at the Quantico Marine Base in Virginia during the trial and flown to court each day by helicopter. Despite the high stakes, Rayful maintained an air of confidence throughout. He tried to argue his innocence, claiming he had never directly sold drugs and that adults were free to make their own choices. He even suggested his wealth came from gambling, not drugs. But these defenses fell flat under the weight of the evidence against him. Rayful's lawyers, William H. Murphy Jr. and James Robertson, respected their client's intelligence but knew the odds were stacked against them. Murphy later remarked that Rayful was one of the brightest people he had ever represented, though he believed Rayful's path to crime was inevitable, given the environment he grew up in. Despite their efforts, the evidence against Rayful was damning. Witnesses, including those once loyal to him, turned on him in exchange for lighter sentences. One of the most shocking betrayals came from Alta Ray Zanville. a close associate who had built her own drug operation with Rayful's support. She wore a wire for federal agents and recorded incriminating conversations with Rayful's mother Perry, who unknowingly provided key evidence. Zanville avoided prosecution and kept her ill-gotten riches, but her cooperation earned her a reputation as a sellout. Even Rayful's childhood friend Brooks Jr. testified against him, detailing how he stored massive amounts of coke for Rayful and transported millions of dollars to facilitate drug deals. The trial took a dramatic turn when Rayful's own sister-in-law testified, admitting he was a drug dealer while denying her involvement. His father refused to testify, invoking the Fifth Amendment, while his mother insisted she had no part in the drug trade. The conflicting testimonies painted a chaotic picture, but the hard evidence left little room for doubt. After 5 days of jury deliberations, Rayful was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, serving 2 concurrent terms. The fallout was devastating for his family. His mother received a 24-year sentence, his sister Rochelle got 21 years, and his brother Melvin Stewart was sentenced to 24 years. Several other co-conspirators faced similar fates. Despite the overwhelming evidence and the violent underworld exposed during the trial, Rayful still had defenders in his community. Many who had admired his rise to power refused to believe he was a drug kingpin. He may have been guilty of knowing the wrong people, but Rayful wasn't no dope pusher, one local insisted. To others, he remained a symbol of ambition. "I looked up to him," said a man known as Bam Bam. "Even if it wasn't an honest job, he worked hard. He started small and made it big."
What happens when accused criminals like Rayful Edmond become heroes in the community?
Actually, he wasn't really the selfish type person. He used to, like I said, he used to take the kids out.
But the trial also revealed the darker side of Rayful's empire, one built on violence, betrayal, and the exploitation of his community. Even after being sentenced to life in prison, Rayful Edmond refused to acknowledge his mistakes. Instead, he clung to the hope that a future appeal or new evidence might set him free. On February 16, 1990, he officially entered the custody of the Bureau of Prisons, starting at the United States Penitentiary, USP in Marion, Illinois. By September 27th of the same year, he was transferred to USP Lewisburg in Pennsylvania, a high-security facility housing about 1,000 inmates. At first, Edmond's reputation for violence and influence made him a high-risk prisoner. To address safety concerns, he was placed in solitary confinement. But over time, he was allowed into the general population and even assigned a job as an orderly. For a brief moment, it seemed like he was trying to stay on the straight and narrow. That, however, didn't last long. It wasn't long before Edmond crossed paths with 2 figures who would shape the next chapter of his criminal career: Dixon Dario Trujillo Blanco and his brother Osvaldo. The Trujillo Blanco brothers were big players in the Colombian drug trade and had been locked up for their roles as major coke suppliers to the United States. Sharing a cell block with Dixon and being just 1 block away from Osvaldo, Edmond found himself in the company of seasoned drug traffickers who operated on an international scale. These connections opened new doors for Edmond. Through the brothers and their network, he gained access to a steady supply of high-quality, low-cost Colombian coke. His previous suppliers in Los Angeles had also been imprisoned, but the Trujillo Blanco brothers introduced him to a fresh network of contacts, and soon he was back in business, even from behind bars.
He had a high-profile case. I had a high-profile case, so we were just wanting somebody to introduce us. We just was waiting for a person to come along and say, "This Chicky, this Ray," and we just gonna go from there.
Tell me what drugs you dealt with in prison. Crack?
Crack.
Heroin?
Heroin.
What else?
Marijuana.
Operating in a prison full of criminals as sharp and dangerous as himself, Edmond adapted. He saw an opportunity to use his connections both inside and outside prison to continue running his drug empire. Working with the Trujillo brothers, he developed a system for conducting business using the prison's telephones, which were supposed to be monitored at all times.
Edmond, despite his incarceration, was continuing to deal using inmate telephones, visitation privileges.
He's calling Colombia by making 3-way calls, by calling an associate outside of the prison who would then make a 3-way call to Colombia.
By speaking in coded language, they were able to broker deals without raising immediate red flags. For instance, phrases like, "You should meet my new girlfriend, she's 6 feet tall," actually referred to 6 kilos of coke. A comment like, "She lives down where we used to live on 22nd Street," was a reference to the $22,000 price tag for the deal. Despite these precautions, prison officials quickly became suspicious of Edmond's frequent and cryptic phone calls. On October 21, 1990, a phone monitor flagged one of his conversations, noting that Edmond seemed to be discussing drug transactions. Edmond wasn't shy about his intentions, once saying, "Just because I'm locked up doesn't mean I can't get what I need." His activities caught the attention of the prison warden and even the FBI, but for a time, authorities seemed content to let things slide. After all, from their perspective, Edmond was already off the streets and serving a life sentence. However, as his activities persisted, the FBI launched a formal investigation into Edmond's prison-based drug operation. Over a 6-month period, federal agents monitored his calls, eventually identifying Osvaldo Trujillo as a key accomplice. Yet, despite their surveillance, deciphering the obscure codes Edmond and the brothers used proved challenging. The extent of his operation was staggering. Edmond reportedly made as many as 60 calls in less than 5 hours, orchestrating drug deals and maintaining his empire. Edmond's run of luck took a hit in October 1992 when Osvaldo Trujillo died. With the loss of this critical connection to Colombian coke, his prison-based drug trade began to unravel. The FBI, seeing the operations decline, shifted its focus to pursuing Edmond's outside associates. Edmond's activities behind bars ultimately added 30 years to his sentence, further solidifying his fate. In a shocking turn of events, Edmond made the controversial decision to cooperate with federal authorities. To reduce his mother's prison sentence, he provided information that led to the arrests of hundreds of people, many of whom were part of his own network or from his community. While this move may have helped his family, it tarnished his reputation. A reputation that was everything in the drug world. By snitching, he shattered the lives of countless others, including those in the very neighborhood he once claimed to protect. Fast forward to recent years and Edmond's story took another unexpected twist. After serving decades behind bars, he was quietly released from prison. Reports described him as being in good spirits, seemingly ready to leave his notorious past behind. But just a few months later, news broke that Edmond had suffered a fatal heart attack. And with that, the life of one of the most infamous drug kingpins in American history came to an end.